Hello my dear students. So I am going to continue the lesson where we discuss the sexual reproduction of plants. In the first few chapters we discussed what reproduction is. Under that we classified reproduction as sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So there again, when we considered the asexual reproduction of plants, you all can remember there is vegetative reproduction that can take place naturally and artificially. So we discussed many examples for natural vegetative reproduction of plants and artificial vegetative reproduction of plants. So now we are going to discuss the sexual reproduction of plants. So when we say sexual reproduction of plants, you all can remember in the evolution process we discussed in classification also angiosperms. What are angiosperms? The plants that produce flowers, flowering plants, and they have seeds covered by a fruit, covered seed plants. Those are the angiosperms. So in these plants, the evolutionary advanced plants, they have the flower, that is the structure that is responsible for the reproduction, or the reproductive structure of plants is flower. So inside the flower, there is the male reproductive structure and the female reproductive structure. Within the male reproductive structure, it will be the male gametes that are produced, and in female reproductive structures, female gametes are produced. When these two gametes fuse together, we call it fertilization, and thereafter the flower develops into fruits, and within the fruits there are seeds. So these seeds grow into a new plant. That is the basic of sexual reproduction of plants. So seeds are produced by fusion of gametes produced in sexual structures in matured plants. So here you can look at the explanation. Sexual reproduction of plants. Seeds are produced by fusion of gametes. So these are terms that you need to remember, students. Seeds are produced by fusion of gametes produced in sexual structures in matured plants. So although the young plants also have flowers, they start producing flowers, but the fertilization and the reproduction process will take place only in the matured stage. So reproduction in matured plants, and these seeds can grow into new plants. That is what you need to remember. So under that, as I told you all, flowers are the reproductive structures of plants. The structure that bears sexual parts, so that is the male part, and the female part is the flower that is present in the flower. Parts of a flower are arranged in whorls on the receptacle. What are whorls? Like a circular arrangement or a spiral-like arrangement. So they are all arranged in whorls on the receptacle, which is located at the tip of the flower stalk or pedicel. So if we take the flower, here you all can remember, students, we have the stalk, then we have the receptacle here, and in this all these structures are arranged like this. You all have seen different arrangements. So this is the stalk, this is the receptacle. So we have the flower stalk, here we have the receptacle part, and on that all the other parts are arranged in a whorl arrangement. So there are different types of whorls in which the parts of the flower are arranged. And also you all know, students, when we look at the monocots and dicots, the monocots have petals either 3 or multiples of 3. That's why we call them as trimerous flowers. Whereas the dicot plants, they are either tetramerous, 4 or multiples of 4, or pentamerous, 5 or multiples of 5 petals. So that is how you have different types of flowers. I'm sure you all are familiar with many different types, and you all know how diverse these flowers are. Now we will try to understand them in more detail. So here you can see the structure that bears sexual parts of a plant is the flower, and parts of a flower are arranged in whorls on the receptacle, which is located at the tip of the flower stalk or pedicel. You are familiar with all these parts, students. We have discussed flowers in smaller grades as well. And there are 4 principal parts of a flower which are given below. What are those 4 principal parts? There is the calyx. Then we have the corolla. Then we have androecium, or what we call as stamen. Another name for androecium is stamen, and gynoecium, that is also known as pistil. So calyx is the whorl of sepals. Corolla is the whorl of petals. Inside that we have the male reproductive structure, androecium or stamen, and the female reproductive structure, gynoecium or pistil. I am sure you all can remember all these parts. So before we try to understand these parts, now we will go to the lab and we will observe the parts of a flower. Okay, students. Now we are going to observe the parts of a flower. So you are familiar with these parts. Now, and also you are familiar with different types of flowers. You know this is a shoe flower, a hibiscus flower. So this is the bloomed one. And here also you can see another shoe flower. Both are shoe flowers. So you can see the different colors, the differences in all these flowers as well. So what we need to do is we need to identify the parts, as well as we need to take a longitudinal section, and inside also we need to identify the different parts of the flower. So as you can see here, students, this is the stalk that attaches the flower to the branch. Then we have the receptacle. Now this part is the receptacle. That is what has all the other structures attached to it in a whorl-like manner. So thereafter, you can see these green color parts. What are they? That is the calyx, a whorl of sepals. And here in this flower also, you can see the calyx, this one. At the same time, here this is a bud of the flower. In this, you can see all the parts. The inner parts of the flower is covered by the calyx. So the sepals provide protection when the flower is in the bud stage. Once it blooms, this is how you get the sepals. So then again, you can see in this we have the corolla that is made up of petals. So all these you can see from here itself the whorl arrangement. Inside you can see only the stalk and the style here, that is part of the female reproductive system, and you can see the stamen containing the anther and the filament. Now here students, you all can see these yellow color small structures, those are the anther. Anther is attached to the style by the filaments. You can see that closely. Can you all see that clearly? So those are the parts that we can see from outside. So in these two shoe flowers, I told you all the stamens that contains the anther and the filament, that's the androecium, male reproductive structure. Then I showed you all the stigma and the style here. Those are parts of the gynoecium, the female reproductive system. So what type of a flower is this? This is a bisexual flower, a flower that contains both male and female reproductive structures. Okay, students. So now that you were able to observe the parts of a flower, now we will try to label the parts of a flower. Longitudinal section of a typical flower. So when you cut the flower in a longitudinal manner and it is a typical flower that has all the different parts, we will be able to label the parts. You will be able to identify the parts and you will be able to label them. So we will start from the bottom. So this is, what is this? It is the stalk or the pedicel. That is what attaches the flower to the plant. So we have the stalk or what we call as pedicel. And then the pedicel expands into what? The receptacle. We have the receptacle And thereafter, these green color structures, what are they? They are the sepals, or what we call as the calyx. So here we have the sepals. Sepals, when they are arranged in a whorl, we call it the calyx. So above that, what do we have? You can see here. Now these, the blue color structure shown here, those are the petals. So here we have the petals. And when we have a whorl of petals, we call it the corolla. Thereafter, you can see this structure. This part is the filament, and this is called the anther, and both together is the stamen or the androecium. So we have the filament. I will write it here. Filament. And we have the anther. Together, this is the androecium or stamen. The male reproductive structure. That includes the filament and the anther. Then what do we have on this side? We have the female reproductive structure. So here we have the ovary. You can see this is the wall of the ovary. Inside that we get the ovules. So although the arrow points to the ovules, I will mark this part as the ovary. This whole structure is the ovary. Then what do we have here? This tube is the style. And here on top we have the stigma. So stigma, style and ovary together is the gynoecium or the pistil. So here we will call it the gynoecium or pistil. That is the female reproductive structure. So I am sure you all will be able to label all these parts, students. So here you can see the stalk or the pedicel, then we have the receptacle. On the receptacle only everything is arranged in a whorl, and the green color structures, those are the sepals that form the calyx. And then we have the petals. Petals can be of any color, white or any other colors and different shapes. And the whorl of petals will be called the corolla. And then we have the male reproductive structure, the filament and the anther. Together we call it stamen or androecium. And on this side we have the ovaries with ovules and everything. Then the style and the stigma together is the gynoecium or the pistil, the female reproductive structure. So when you are given the longitudinal section of a typical flower, you should be able to identify and label all the parts. And we have looked at the flower also, so you have a very good understanding about this. So with this, students, I am going to move on to the next slide. Then we have the calyx. Now here, if you look at the three pictures, here you can see the different stages in which a bud blooms into a flower bud blooming into a flower. Now here you can see, students, the green color structure that covers the flower. That is the calyx. It is a whorl of sepals. Sepals arranged into a whorl is known as the calyx. So here, if we look at the details, calyx is comprised of several sepals. And this is the outermost part of a flower. So here you can see the outermost part that covers the flower bud, and when the flower blooms, that will be the outermost part of the flower. And calyx is the whorl of sepals located on the receptacle at the tip of the flower stalk or pedicel, that you can see easily in this diagram. So here you can see this is the stalk or the pedicel, and here we have the outermost layer. The color will be green. The calyx or the sepals are green in color, always green in color. and the function is to protect the parts of the flower in its bud stage. So here you can see when it is the bud, the sepals completely cover the flower parts. So there it provides protection. That is the function of calyx. So I am sure you all can understand that. Calyx is comprised of several sepals. It is the outermost part of a flower, and calyx is the whorl of sepals located on the receptacle at the tip of the flower stalk, that is the pedicel, and color is green, and the function is to protect the parts of the flower in its bud stage. So that is the outermost layer. Then we will move on to the next one, the next layer, that is corolla. So as you can see here students, I have included a few flowers, but here you can see in the bud stage. Now the calyx, that is this green color part, this is the calyx. Now calyx is almost open, but still it is in the bud stage. The flower has not bloomed completely. So here you can see the purple color, those are the petals. So petals in a whorl, they form the corolla. So now they are protecting the internal parts of the flower. So if we look at the features, corolla is comprised of a whorl of petals and it is located inner to the calyx. That is the sepals. And it can have many different colors. Here you can see students, the other pictures. Once the flower blooms, here you can see the blue water lily, then a shoe flower, an orchid, the Candian dancer. This is blue in color. The petals are blue in color. Here it's white. Here yellow but with red color regions as well. So you all know normally the most colorful and attractive part of the flower is the corolla. That is made up of petals. And not only the protection in the bud stage, when it blooms, when the flower blooms and when it comes to the mature stage, these colors and shapes, they attract the insects for pollination. So that is another function of corolla. If we look at the color, it can be white or colored. And also there are two functions. Protects the inner parts of the flower in the bud stage. So that is this. Then the next function attracts insects for pollination. That is when the flower is mature and ready to reproduce. So two functions. One is to protect the inner parts of the flower in the bud stage. The second one is to attract insects for pollination. So that is why you get different types of colorful and pretty corolla or petals. The corolla is a whorl of petals. Is that clear to you all students? So then we will move on to the next part of the flower, that is androecium or stamen. So first look at the picture here, the two diagrams. Here you can see this is part of the shoe flower. What you see as these yellow colored structures, those are the anther. All these are anther, and so this structure is the filament, and both together is what we call as the stamen. Anther and filament together is the stamen. If we look at the structure here, Again here you can see this is the filament, this is the anther. So anther. Then we have the filament here. Filament is the one that attaches the anther to the, here of course it is the style. Above that you can see the stigma there. And here you can see inside this anther there are pollen sacs. So there you will get pollen sacs. Inside the anther there are pollen sacs. Inside the pollen sacs only the pollens develop. And these pollens are the male gamete cells. So those are the structures or parts of the male reproductive structure that you need to remember. It has a filament and the anther. Inside the anther there are pollen sacs. Inside the pollen sacs only the male gametes, those are the pollens, develop inside the pollen sacs. And when this anther is matured enough, the pollen sacs break off, it bursts off and the pollens are released. That is the start of sexual reproduction. So here we can see it is the male reproductive structure. Reproductive structure. So that is the androecium or stamen. Then we have, this is comprised of a anther and filament. There are pollen sacs in the anther. There are pollen sacs in the anther and pollens are produced in the pollen sacs. Pollens are produced in the pollen sacs and pollens are released by the bursting of mature anther. And pollen are the male gamete cells. All what I explained to you. So I am sure you all can understand that. Then the next structure is going to be gynoecium or pistil. Now if we look at the structure. Now here you can see a shoe flower. This is similar to the longitudinal section. You can see the stalk here, then the receptacle, then the sepals are there. Then we have the petals or the corolla. Here you can see the female reproductive structure. What is this? This is going to be the ovary. And here we have the style. And here we have the stigma. So ovary, style and stigma. Those three structures together is the gynoecium or the pistil, the female reproductive structure of a flower. So if we look at the characters or features, gynoecium is the female reproductive structure. That is gynoecium or pistil. And this is comprised of three parts. What are they? Stigma, style and ovary. Stigma, style and ovary. And the ovules are located in the ovary. Inside the ovary only you can see, if you look closely here, inside the ovary you will get the ovules. And ovules are the female gamete cells. So all what I have explained. We will again look at the picture. You can see there ovary, style and it is stigma. There it has to be stigma. Those are the three parts of the female reproductive structure, that is gynoecium or pistil. And inside the ovary only ovules are produced. And these ovules are the female gamete cells. Is that clear to you all students? So those are the four main parts of a flower. Outermost layer, outermost whorl of sepals is known as the calyx. Then the next layer, the whorl of petals, it's the corolla. So sepals are to protect the flowers in the bud stage. Corolla also protects the flower in the bud stage, but once the flower blooms, the colorful petals attract the insects for pollination. And then we have the androecium, that is with same filament and anther, or what we call as androecium or stamen, that consists of the filament and anther, that is the male reproductive structure. And female reproductive structure, ovary, stigma and style. Altogether we call it the gynoecium or the pistil. So they are the female reproductive structures. And the male gametes are the pollens, female gametes are the ovules. So that is the structure of a flower. With that, students, I will move on to the next slide. We have an activity. Collect some flowers, observe and identify their parts using a hand lens. So you need to collect some flowers, you need to observe their parts. Why do you need to observe their parts? So that you can see how different these parts look like. Basically, they are the same. The calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. But the way they are constructed or way they are in the flower will be different. So that is what you are supposed to observe. And observe using a hand lens so you can see the ovules and everything clearly. Invert a shoe flower and cut longitudinally across the stalk and draw a labeled diagram. So here already we have labeled the diagram, so you know the parts. That was also a longitudinal section. But here what we need to do is, we need to cut the flower longitudinally across. You need to invert it and then cut it. Then you need to observe the parts and we need to draw and label the diagram. So before doing that, we will go to the lab and we will observe this flower. Then we will observe the longitudinal section of a shoe flower. Thereafter, I will draw and show you all the diagram. What I am going to do is, I am going to take a longitudinal section of the flower. To do that, I will take the flower from here. Then from this side, using a sharp blade, if we cut it across. So here, this is how we can take the longitudinal section. In this, now you all can see, students, this is how in a whirl manner all the parts are arranged. So here you can see, students, this is the stalk that attaches the flower to the branch. Then here we have the green color, the sepals, that is in a whirl arrangement. Then inside we could not see the parts, this part before, that is part of the gynoecium or the pistil. The female reproductive structure, this is the ovary, you can see here. Inside the ovaries, you will be able to see the ovule. So students, now when you all are observing the flower, you can use the hand lens and observe it more clearly. But for now, I will show you all the flower only. So here you can see, students, the ovary with the ovules inside. From the ovary, you can see this is the ovary. Then we have this part, this structure, that is the style. And here at the end of the style, we have these, those are the stigma. And here you can see the filaments. These structures are the filaments. At the end of the filaments, we have the anther. So here it is the anther and the filament together is the stamen. So those are the parts of the flower. Now what we can do is, we can remove these to understand that they are attached in a whirl-like manner. Now I am removing this. So here with one petal you can see. So can you all see the whorl-like arrangement there? So those are the different parts of the flower. So in a flower, the important parts, the stalk, then we have the pedicel, then we have the sepals, petals. Sepals make up the calyx, petals make up the corolla. Then we have the female reproductive structure, the pistil, or what we call as the gynoecium. And the male reproductive structure, that is known as the stamen or the androecium. So those are the parts of a flower. You all have learned this before also, and we need to draw a diagram of the longitudinal section of the flower. So I am sure you all can do that by yourself now. You can also cut a flower at home and you all can observe all these parts more clearly. Okay, students. So now you were able to observe the longitudinal section of a shoe flower. So then we will have to draw and label the diagram. I will start with the stalk or the pedicel. Then we have the receptacle there. Then we have the corolla. So this is how you see it. Then here there is the ovary. From the ovary we have the stigma and here the style. Then we have the androecium. So those are the parts that you basically need to draw. So here we have the stalk, then we have the different parts. Okay. First I will label these parts. So here you know this is the stalk or the pedicel. Then what is this? These are the calyx. Calyx, that is composed of the sepals. And also at this point is what we call, this part is what we call as the receptacle. Then we have this colorful part, that is the corolla. Corolla of the petal. So you all should know, students, when it is one, it is the petal, whorl of petals is the corolla. So the same goes for calyx. One is the sepal, whorl of sepals is the calyx. Then here we have the filament, and this dot is, or this particular structure is the anther. Both together is what? It is the male reproductive structure, androecium. So here both together, filament and anther together, androecium. Or stamen. Another name, stamen. Then on this side, what do we have? Here we have the ovary, then we have the style, and here we have the stigma. So this is the ovary, then we have the style, and here we have the stigma. This part is the stigma, the tip there, then here is the style, and this is the ovary. Inside the ovary, what do we get? We normally have the ovary wall like this, and in the middle we have a structure where there are ovules. We can also label the ovules there. Those are the ovules. So stigma, style and ovary together is known as the gynoecium or pistil. Is that clear to you all students? So if we look at all the parts, so this is the longitudinal section of a flower. Starting from here, stalk or pedicel, then we have the receptacle, then we have the sepals, after that we have the petals, then we have the female reproductive structure, ovary, stigma and style, and inside the ovary you might be able to see the ovules, and here we have the filament and anther. Together we call it the androecium or the stamen. So these are the parts of the flower. Now twice I have labeled the parts of the flower. Initially in the diagram, this is after looking at the longitudinal section. So I am sure you will also be able to cut the flower in a longitudinal manner. Then you can observe it, you can draw the parts and you can label them. I am sure you all can also do it very well like this. Similar to this, you can even observe different flowers and you can draw them and label the parts. So is that clear to you all students? I am sure it is. So with that, we will move on to the next slide. So then we will discuss the types of flowers. Now this is based on the way they have the male and female reproductive structures. If a flower has both male and female reproductive structures, we call it bisexual flowers. If the flower has only male reproductive structure, then it is a male flower. If it's only the female reproductive structure, we will be calling it the female flower. So there it is only one sex, either male or female. So we will be referring to those flowers as unisexual flowers. So first we will discuss bisexual flowers. Flowers that possess both male and female reproductive structures. Structures are known as bisexual flowers. So both androecium and gynoecium are present in the same flower. For example, shoe flower, you were able to see both. So that is either the stamen and the pistil. Both are there in one flower. So as examples, we can look at these flowers. This one, the first example is shoe flower. Then this one, you would have seen this flower. It is the passion fruit. Passion fruit. Then here we have this flower. This is chilies. Chili flower. And here we have katurumurunga or agatti. Katurumurunga or what we call as agatti. Sesbenia flowers. So shoe flower, passion fruit, chili flower and katurumurunga or agatti, those are all bisexual flowers. That means they have both stamen and pistil in the same flower, or androecium and gynoecium in the same flower, or you can say both male and female reproductive structures in the same flower. So bisexual flowers. Then we have the next type, the unisexual flowers. So then unisexual flowers. So as we already discussed, bisexual flowers have both male and female reproductive structures, or the androecium and gynoecium. But when we say unisexual flowers, they only have either the male reproductive structure or the female reproductive structure. Then we call them as unisexual flowers. So they will either possess the androecium or the gynoecium. or in other words we can say they will either have the pistil or the stamen. So if we define unisexual flowers, flowers that possess either the male or female structure. You can complete it and say are known as unisexual flowers. So flowers that possess either the male or female reproductive structure is known as the unisexual flower. Now as I told you all, they only have either the androecium or gynoecium or pistil or stamen. So based on that, there will be two types of flowers. So one is staminate flower, the other one is going to be pistillate flower. So if they have the androecium or the male reproductive structure, which is known as the stamen, we call it the staminate flower. If they have the gynoecium or the pistil or the female reproductive structure, we call it the pistillate flower. So there are two types. The first one, flowers that have only androecium or stamen, so we call them staminate flower. Staminate flower. Staminate flower, the flowers that have only androecium or stamen. So sometimes students, both these flowers can be present in the same plant, sometimes they can be present in different plants. So if we look at examples, if we take pumpkin, the pumpkin plant has two flowers, the staminate flower and the pistillate flower. So the sterile flower of pumpkin is a staminate flower. The same goes for corn. If you take corn, you all know what corn is. So they have the staminate flower and the pistillate flower. So the apical flowers of corn is staminate flower. So as examples, we can consider the sterile flowers of pumpkin, flowers of pumpkin and apical flowers of corn. Then, if we look at the second type, as I told you all, this has the gynoecium or the pistil. So we call it the pistillate flower. Second type is pistillate flower. So pistillate flower, the flowers that have only gynoecium or pistil. So those are the female reproductive structures. Gynoecium or pistil, pistillate flower. So the same plants, both the pumpkin flower and corn flower, they have the pistillate flowers as well. So fruit bearing examples, fruit bearing flowers of pumpkin and fruit bearing flowers of corn. Why do we say fruit bearing flowers? Now we will be discussing after this, we will be discussing the process of fertilization. So there you will understand the female reproductive structure. We have discussed that already, ovary, style and stigma. So the ovaries become the fruit. So ovary is part of the gynoecium or the pistil. So that is why we say fruit bearing flowers of pumpkin, fruit bearing flowers of corn. So again, if I go through the two types of flowers under unisexual flowers, we have unisexual flowers, flowers that possess either the male or female structure. So under that we have two types, the staminate flower, flower that has the androecium or the stamen only. That is the male reproductive structure. So when we say stamen, what are the parts? The anther and the filament. So that is possessed by the staminate flower. Examples are sterile flowers of pumpkin, apical flowers of corn. The second type is pistillate flowers, the flowers that have the gynoecium or the pistil, ovary, style and stigma. Examples are fruit-bearing flowers of pumpkin, fruit-bearing flowers of corn. So now we have discussed the two types of flowers, the bisexual flower and the unisexual flower. If a plant has bisexual flowers, for example, shoe flower or hibiscus, then we call it a complete plant. So there it has both the male and female reproductive structures in the same flower, same plant. But when the plants have unisexual flowers, now some of the plants can have both the flowers on the same plant. For example, if we take coconut, there both the pistillate and staminate flowers are going to be on the same plant. Whereas if you take certain other plants, they have two plants. One plant will have the staminate flower, the other plant will have the pistillate flower. Based on that, we will be dividing plants into two types, monoecious plants and dioecious plants. That is what I will be discussing after I show you all the examples for these two flowers. Now here see in the diagram, you all can see the pumpkin flowers. Now here this one is the staminate flower. So here this is pumpkin. This is the staminate flower. Here you can see this structure with the ovary here. So that is the pistillate flower. Pistillate flower. So that is in pumpkin. The same way, here you all can see this is corn. In corn, the apical flower is the staminate flower. The staminate flower. So here you can see this is the apical flower or the staminate flower which has the male reproductive structure. And on this side, here you can see the stigma falling down like the hair like structure, and you can see it has developed into a fruit, the corn. So this is the fruit bearing flower of corn, that is pistillate flower. Pistillate flower. Another example, as we discussed before, is coconut. So pumpkin, corn, coconut, all of them have unisexual flowers. So the staminate flower and the pistillate flower separately. That is one adaptation. With that, we will move on to the next one. Monoecious plants. Plants that bear both staminate flowers and pistillate flowers. So staminate flower is the male flower, pistillate flower is the female flower. Both flowers are present in the same plant. As examples, you can see here, coconut. Coconut I told you all. The apical flowers of coconut is the staminate flower. Fruit bearing flowers usually they are towards the bottom, which become like coconut, you would have seen. So they become the fruit. So both these are present in one plant. So examples, coconut tree, coconut. Then what is this? It is pumpkin. So pumpkin is again staminate and pistillate flowers. So we have pumpkin. Then here you can see this is corn. Corn also has both staminate and pistillate flowers in the same plant. So those are monoecious plants. Corn. And these are flowers of bitter gourd. Bitter gourd also has both staminate and pistillate flowers in the same plant. So bitter gourd. Bitter gourd. So examples: coconut, pumpkin, corn and bitter gourd. Coconut, pumpkin, corn and bitter gourd, those are the monoecious plants. Is that clear to you all students? So then I will move on to the next slide. Dioecious plants. When staminate flowers and pistillate flowers are borne separately on two plants, they are called dioecious plants. So you will have two types of plants. One type of plant that has the female flowers or the pistillate flowers, and the other plant will have the staminate flowers or the male flowers. So examples you can see here: Vallisneria and pepper. So examples: Vallisneria and pepper. So those are the dioecious plants. There are two plants. Di means two. Dioecious plants. When staminate flowers and pistillate flowers are borne separately on two plants, they are called dioecious plants. Examples are, here you can see Vallisneria and pepper. I am sure you all can understand that clearly, students. With that, I will move on to the next slide. So then, we will be moving on to the process of reproduction, that is sexual reproduction in plants. The first step of reproduction is pollination. So you all know the flower is the reproductive structure. Now we have discussed the androecium, male reproductive structure. Inside that, the pollens are produced. So there it comes to the matured stage with all the pollens inside the pollen sacs of the anther. Then we have the female reproductive structure. Inside the ovaries, there are the ovules produced. Now, they are also in the mature stage. At that point, the pollen sacs burst open, that is the anther bursts open, and the pollens are released. So, these pollens have to go and deposit on the stigma of the female reproductive structure. Thereafter, the pollen grows into a pollen tube and that reaches the ovaries. There, the pollen gametes inside the pollens will move through the pollen tube and they will reach the ovary. Inside the ovary, the gametes, that is the male gametes, will fuse with the ovules, that is the female gametes. That process will be the fertilization process. So, for that to happen, the pollens have to come out of the anther, that is released by the bursting of the anther, and they have to deposit on the stigma. That process is what we call as pollination. So here we can say the process of depositing mature pollens of a flower on the stigma of a flower of the same species is known as pollination. So, the process of depositing mature pollens of a flower on the stigma of a flower of the same species. Stigma of a flower of the same species. is known as pollination. So, it has to be the pollens from the anther depositing on the stigma. Now, this can happen in two ways. If you look at these two diagrams. Now, here look at this diagram first. There is only one flower. So, the pollens are matured. They come out of the anther from inside the pollen sacs and they will fall on the stigma. So, here it's actually the pollen from here coming and falling on the stigma there. Then what will happen? That is pollination, but only one flower is involved. Then we call it self-pollination within the same flower. So, self-pollination. Pollens of the flower deposit on the stigma of the same flower. That is known as self-pollination. Look at the second diagram. There are two flowers involved. So, the pollens from one flower deposit on the stigma of the next flower, or it can be the other way around. Pollens from this flower can deposit on the stigma of the second flower. So, there needs to be two flowers. Then we call it cross-pollination. So, self-pollination, there is only one flower. The pollens from the flower deposit on the stigma of the same flower. Whereas, in cross-pollination, the pollens from the mature pollens from one flower deposit on the stigma of another flower. So, that is cross-pollination. You all have to remember the two methods. We will discuss these two in little bit more detail in the next slide. So, pollination is the process of depositing mature pollens of a flower on the stigma of a flower of the same species is known as pollination, and that can take place in two ways, self-pollination and cross-pollination. With that, I will move on to the next slide, self-pollination. So, again we have a diagram here students, you all can see only one flower. So, when the anther matures, it bursts open, the pollens come out and the pollens deposit on the stigma of the same flower. Then we call it self-pollination. If we write that, the depositing of matured pollens on the stigma of the same flower is known as self-pollination. Self-pollination. So, in this, the important part is the same flower. The depositing of matured pollens on the stigma of the same flower is known as self-pollination. Only one flower is involved. Then we have the next step. Now, in this process, students, it is the pollen and the stigma. So, inside the ovaries, you have the ovules. Both belong to the same flower. Then, both of them will have the same genes. The pollens and the ovules have the same genes. So, the new generation or the offspring that are produced are also going to have the same genes, so the same characteristics. So, there is no chance of new variations forming or new species forming. That is a disadvantage of self-pollination. But that is possible in the next type, that is cross-pollination. So, here we have cross-pollination. Again, you can see the diagram here, students. We have the pollens here, mature pollens from this flower can go and deposit on the stigma of the second flower. The same way, pollens from this flower can come and deposit on the stigma of the second flower. So here, both these need not take place between these two flowers only. It can be the pollens from here going to that stigma or pollens from there coming to this stigma. Both need not happen at the same time. Now here we need two flowers. Now these two flowers can be in the same plant. It can be two flowers of the same plant, or else it can be in two different plants of the same species. Two plants of the same species. So it can be flowers of one plant or flowers from two plants of the same species. Both are considered as cross-pollination. Why? There are two flowers involved. So characteristic from two flowers, two plants, they can mix together, new species can form. So there, if we define cross-pollination, the process of depositing mature pollens of a flower on the stigma of another flower of the same plant or the flower of another plant of the same species. That is also okay. The process of depositing mature pollens of a flower on the stigma of another flower of the same plant or the flower of another plant of the same species. So either way, there needs to be two flowers involved. So in this, there is the possibility of mixing of characteristics, especially when there are two plants involved. So here we can say, when pollination occurs between flowers, when pollination occurs between flowers of two plants of the same species, the characteristics can mix together. Therefore, new characteristics can be produced, giving rise to new species. So that is an advantage of cross-pollination. Mixing of characteristics, new characteristics being produced, therefore new species can be produced. So this is needed for the process of evolution. Therefore, plants have adaptations to prevent self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination. So now we will discuss some of these adaptations shown by plants in order to prevent self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination. Cross-pollination allows to mix characteristics of two plants. This is what I told you all in the previous slide. So it helps to give rise to a strong new generation with new characteristics. Therefore, some flowers are adapted to avoid self-pollination and promote cross-pollination. Some of those adaptations are mentioned below. So, under that, we will be discussing unisexual plants, flowers, unisexual flowers. Then there is something called self-sterility. Then there is hercogamy. Having extrose stamens, and there is dichogamy. So those are different adaptations shown by plants. They can be unisexual flowers, there can be self-sterility, hercogamy, having extrostamens, and dichogamy. I will discuss all these adaptations one by one. So, having unisexual flowers. I explained this to you all before also. Either staminate flowers or pistillate flowers. So, having unisexual flowers with only, or we can say either the male or female reproductive structure. So that means there will be two types of flowers. What are they? The staminate flower and the pistillate flower. So as examples, you all can look at these examples. You are familiar with this. What is this? Coconut. You can remember in coconut, the mature flowers of coconut is the staminate flower and the fruit-bearing flowers of coconut is the pistillate flower. Same goes for corn. Corn, you have the apical flowers of corn. Those are the staminate flowers and the pistillate flowers are the fruit-bearing flowers. So here we have examples, coconut and corn having unisexual flowers. So it will be staminate flowers and pistillate flowers separately. So obviously there has to be cross-pollination. No possibility of self-pollination because in one flower only one reproductive structure is there. With that, I will move on to the next one. The second one is self-sterility. So, self-sterility is seen in bisexual flowers, a flower having both the androecium and gynoecium. So, if the pollens from that flower fall on the stigma, it does not develop into a fruit. So, that is what we call as self-sterility. So, here in bisexual flowers, when the mature pollen of the flower is deposited on the stigma of the same flower. It does not develop into a fruit. So that is self-sterility. Pollens of the same flower fall on the stigma of that flower that will not develop into a fruit. So self-pollination is prevented by having self-sterility. So they are not sterile to their own pollens. That is the meaning of sterility. Sterility means the pollen can fall on the stigma. It can fuse with the gametes. The male and female gametes can fuse together. So fertilization will occur and the ovary will develop into a fruit. That is not possible. So that is self-sterility. They are not sterile. So that is seen in passion fruit. Here you can see example passion fruit. So passion fruit is a bisexual flower, but there is self-sterility. I am sure you all can understand that. Then we have the next one, that is hercogamy. Now when we say hercogamy, here also both the stigma and stamen are present on the same flower. So it's a bisexual flower. But the thing is, they are positioned at a distance. So here you can see this is an orchid flower. Now when you look at this orchid flower, you can see the stigma is in one place, whereas the anther or the stamens are somewhat far apart. So there is no chance of the pollens from that stamen falling on the stigma of the same flower. So the shape of the flower is in such a way that the stigma and the anther are far apart, kept at a distance. Same goes for this catharanthus. Here also you will be able to observe that the anther and the stigma are kept at a distance so that there will be no self-pollination. So hercogamy means positioning of the anther and stigma at a distance so that self-pollination will not take place. So examples are orchid and catharanthus. Catharanthus. Orchid and catharanthus. So the hercogamy is the positioning of the anther and the stigma at a distance so that self-pollination will not take place. Examples are orchid and catharanthus. That is another adaptation. I will move on to the next one. Having extrostamen. Now when we say extrostamen, what happens is either the stigma is long and the stamens are short. That is, the pistil is very long, the stigma is high above and the anther is below. So that the pollens from the anther cannot reach the stigma. So here if you look at this, if you look at these flowers, you can see the stigma is longer. Here we have the stigma, whereas the anther is somewhere there. So stigma is up, anther is below. So the pollens cannot go to the stigma of the same flower. or else it can be the other way around. Here you can see the anther are away or exposed outside longer, whereas the stigma is shorter. Even in this flower you can see that. Here you can see the stigma in the middle, short stigma, whereas the anther, they are all very long. So these are known as having extrose stamen. So here, if we try to explain what having extrose stamens are, the stigma is straight while the stamens are bent to a side, or the stamens are kept straight while the stigma is bent to a side. So the stigma is straight while the stamens are bent to a side, or it can be the stamens are kept straight while the stigma is bent to a side. So that is what we call as having extrose stamens. So then also either the pollens will fall away, or if the stamen is short and the stigma is bent to a side, then also the pollens cannot reach the stigma. So again, it prevents self-pollination. So the examples here, we can see jasmine flowers, jasmine. Now here I have shown these are different types of jasmine. This one, here also you can see I put these pictures so that you can see the positioning clearly. Here also when you look closely, you can see in the middle the stigma and the stamen bent to the other side. So here this is the lebec flower or pinna flower. That again shows this extrose stamen. So lebec flower or what we call as pin. Jasmine and lebec flower, they both have extrose stamen. I am sure this is clear to you all students. With that, I will move on to the last one, dichogamy. Now, dichogamy means maturing of the male and female reproductive structures at different time periods. So that when the male reproductive structure, that is the stamen, is mature, the stigma or the pistil is not mature. So even if the pollens fall on the stigma, there is no chance for fertilization. Whereas when the pistil is mature, the stamen may not be mature. So both stamen and pistil mature at different time periods. That is known as dichogamy. So here we can say maturing of stamen and pistil at different time periods. So depending on how this happens, if stamens are matured earlier than the pistil, that is the male reproductive structure is mature before the female reproductive structure, we call it proterandry. Proterandry means stamens are matured earlier than pistil. Protogyny means pistil is matured earlier than the stamens. So proterandry, stamens are matured earlier than pistil. Protogyny, pistil is matured earlier than stamens. both together is known as dichogamy, maturing of pistil and stamen at different time periods. And the examples are here, you can see this is corn and that is tridax. So here we have corn and tridax that show dichogamy. So these are all adaptations to prevent self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination. So with that, students, now we will go to the lab and observe some of these flowers in order to understand these adaptations. So you all know there is pollination. Pollination is the process by which the mature pollens are deposited on the stigma of the flower. That can occur in two ways, self-pollination and cross-pollination. As you already know, cross-pollination is more better. Why? Because there is mixing of characteristics, so new species can be formed. Therefore, flowers or plants have adaptations to avoid self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination. So I'll repeat. So here I have some flowers with those adaptations. Now this of course is a hibiscus flower, a shoe flower. This doesn't have any adaptation to prevent self-pollination. This is a bisexual flower that you already know. I just wanted to compare this with the other flowers. That's why I have it here. So I'll keep it aside. So then you all are familiar with unisexual flowers. So first I have the flowers that are unisexual. Normally unisexual, the pistillate and terminate flowers are separate. You all can remember, students, corn, coconut, even paddy, these are all unisexual flowers. So in unisexual flowers, here I have the coconut flowers. You all know in coconut, the flowers that bear fruits are the female flowers and the flowers at the top or towards the shoot apex are the male flowers. So here I have the unisexual flowers of coconut. You all can see that. Then there is an adaptation, self-sterility. Self-sterility is the adaptation where the pollens of the flower, if it falls on the stigma of the same flower, it will not develop into a pollen tube and lead to fertilization. An example of that is passion. So here you can see the passion fruit flower here. This is almost in the bud stage. It has not bloomed completely. If I open it out like this, here you all can see another adaptation as well. You can see these, students. This is the stigma. Here we have the stamens at the bottom. So the positioning of stigma and stamen also help to prevent self-pollination as well as they show self-sterility. Then I have the flower, orchid flower. This shows the adaptation hercogamy. When we say hercogamy, positioning of the stamen and the stigma far apart. That you can observe in this orchid flower. Here you all can see the stigma and the stamens are positioned far apart so that there is less chances of the pollens from the flower falling on the stigma of the same flower, hercogamy. Then we have the jasmine flowers. They show extrose stamens. Extrose stamens means either the stamens are bent out and the stigma is straight, or the stigma bends outwards while the stamens are short. So there again, there is less chances of the pollen falling on the stigma of the same flower. So that is jasmine flower there. Then we have tridax. Tridax shows the adaptation dichogamy. Dichogamy means the maturation of the pistil and the stamen occur at different time periods. So that when the female reproductive system is mature, there is pollination possible. But the male reproductive part, the stamen, is not mature. So that is seen in these flowers, tridax flowers. Now here these are also bisexual flowers. Actually there are small flowers all arranged into one. It has the male and female flowers together, but still there is dichogamy there. So these are some flowers with different adaptations to prevent self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination. Okay, students. So now that you have seen these adaptations, you all know how these flowers are and how they prevent self-pollination. So with that, I am going to end this chapter, and in the next chapter, I will discuss the agents of pollination, and thereafter we will discuss the fertilization process and the development thereafter.